Okay, so one segment down, we are now going to go to a CTS debut. So we're going to start with Matt running the numbers, and then Josh will give a little bio on the band ULTRAVOX. We're going to be covering ha 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 today, exclamation point. Matt?
So ha ha ha, ha ha ha. Ho,
Yeah.
ho, no, not ho, ho. Ha, ha.
Our goal is to say it as many different ways as possible, I think, tonight. Yeah. There's another one.
ULTRAVOX from 1977. This comes in number 814 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums. Number 71 in 1977. Number 4,666 of all time. It's not on Rolling Stone's list of Best Albums. And it's it's their third highest rated album on Best Ever Albums.
Got it.
Okay, ULTRAVOX were a British new wave band formed in London in April 1974 as Tiger Lily, and between 1980 and 1986 they scored 7 top 10 albums and 17 top 40 singles in the UK.
Oof. Okay. Well, Josh,
And why are we? Because they're not on Rolling Stone. Are they on 1001 albums? Or
this, my friends, was a recommendation from CTS Superfan Jeff. Was who recommended this.
Oh, that makes sense.
Well,
so I
thank you, Jeff.
Oh, go ahead, Josh. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh, one other fun fact: the exclamation point in the band is a tribute to the krautrock band Neu, who also had an exclamation point. So
that makes
hey,
sense.
Wasn't Jeff on that episode?
He was. Yep.
Oh, there you go.
It all
Jeff
comes
loves
together, my friend.
Jeff loves his exclamation marks, doesn't he?
There you go. Well, let's see if Jeff led us in the right direction. So, Josh, thoughts?
Well, I had never heard of this band before, and I'm so glad I listened to it because this was a big discovery week for me. I really like this. I found it was this crazy combination of like Britpop, punk rock. I heard almost like Arctic Monkeys type of rock music in them as well, and they weren't afraid to throw in keyboards and synth and even go kind of like ambient Eno-esque instrumentals that go hard right into punk rock, as in on the track Distant Smile. They are great on the guitars as well. They seem to kind of wear their influences on the sleeve, but I really enjoyed where this band took me, and I just loved speaking of noise rock, there was some feedback that I heard on this as well to end songs, and I don't think we've heard too much of that intentionally before up to this point.
Unless we count Matt in his 60s episodes attributing everything to the Beatles and claiming the feedback was all.
I'm sure that the Beatles were influential on ULTRAVOX.
Well, they were from the same country, so I guess they were.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure they heard of them at least, right?
Does that mean by those standards? Does that mean that like Nirvana and I have similar influences in terms of
sure.
Also, I believe Brian Eno produced their first album that they did, ULTRAVOX, not this one, but an earlier one. So Eno's
we're pretty safe just guessing that, aren't we? Just that he or Todd Rundgren. It's like, all right, which one of these two produced the album? So
yep. And so I overall I really liked the punk rock sensibility. I think we're firmly in that phase of the 70s, and it's taking front and center, and it's mixing punk with this danceability, dance pop, and even something like Roxy Music or David Bowie in here, and probably some krautrock too influence.
Oh, how I love this album, guys. This was so good. It was noise rock and new wave and an explosion of experimental. It's like if you took the things, Matt, I know you like the Ravenettes, and I always say the Ravenettes thing, or the Jesus and Mary Chain, kind of that noise rock sound that came. There's elements of that mixed with the punk rock aggression. I loved everything about this album. It was so vibrant as an album. It was it walked the line of being angry and being energetic, which is exactly how I like my music. And I feel that the late 70s in particular is a really good time for that type of music, where they straddle the line fantastically between those two ideas, because it's easy to just sound angry and it's easy to just sound sort of energetic, right? Because they could have easily become like Sparks on this album, right? Couldn't you see that? Like where with a certain thing they could have become Sparks. And I like the Sparks album too, Kimono My House. But then they could have gone harder edge and gone full punk as well, but they managed to find a lane in between. I think my takeaway on this is how much, and I've said this before, how important it is that we've listened to albums leading up to this, because a lot of my context for what this sounds like would have been artists that came afterwards, noise rock, punk rock, contemporaries, like punk rock, noise rock, art rock, stuff like that. But now you can kind of piece together, here's what the Stooges sound like, and the Stooges, begat, some of the krautrock, and then you put these pieces together, right, and the ambient music, and you see how all of these things led up to what Ultravox was, right, and I know that their big album, I think, is Vienna. I think that's the one that comes later in 1980. That's considered sort of like their master work. But I'm glad we heard this one because it fits nicely into like the Pink Flag album by Wire we listened to. It fits sort of into that real, in the punk era, I guess you could call it, proto-punk, or even some people would say like the sound is like a post-punk sound, I guess. There's a lot of like fancy $100 words that we can use to describe it. But I think at the end of the day, what I describe is I love the guitar parts on this album. I love how discordant it was, but also stayed together with the pop sensibility, kind of like we talked about with the Talking Heads, but with instead of the funk tying it together, this was more of like the punk noise rock sound, feedback sound. A couple standouts for me. I love the song Distant Smile, was awesome. The song Artificial Life was really awesome. Hiroshima Mon Amour was like new romantic almost, which we haven't really covered any of what's considered to be the new romantic sound. I guess the closest we got was like the Roxy Music album, but they lean more into that sound later. And this definitely has elements of Roxy Music, by the way. I know I'm hearkening back to stuff. That's another one that I should talk about, the effect, that art rock sound had, tied to rock and roll. So that was there. But yeah, Hiroshima Mon Amour almost seemed like it was an entree into like what the band would sound like later, because the first part of it was definitely harder edge, and then you get Hiroshima Mon Amour to end it, which it was a really interesting diversion. And once again, it's the second straight album where the end of the album veered in a totally different direction than the theme of the beginning of it. So that was another welcome surprise, I think, because if it had just ended after song 7, While I'm Still Alive, I still would have loved this album. But the fact they threw me another tidbit at the end that went in a different direction. I even listened to Young Savage, which is like a bonus track after it, and that was a great track too. And I kind of did that by accident, but I stayed with it, and it almost was like a B-side that was in there, and that could have easily fit its way onto the album as well. So yeah, real strong thumbs up for me on this one. I love this album.
John, did you know this before?
I only knew of this group by name and by the fact that it's one of a number of bands that, as we mentioned before, my buddy Jeff, who loves the mid, and we're going to do some others, by the way, in the Jeff collection. We've done a lot already, but we haven't covered like Television yet, and I know that's another one that's there. But yeah, he would always. If Jeff, if you're listening, which sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but if you are, we're eventually getting to all of yours. Noi, Kraftwerk, Suicide, we're going to do Magazine. We've now done Ultravox, so this is another one there. So I know he expounded on how much he loved this band and kind of always told me that I would love them, knowing my 80s preferences, so to speak, and he wasn't wrong. So,
well, sometimes Jeff is off, like, in my opinion, with like something like Suicide, and then sometimes he hits big time like this, because this, I agree, this is great. This is I thought initially with the first song, rock. I like the way that's spelled out. It's rock and then WROK, and all in one
and
word.
A capital O after the capital R as well.
Yeah. So they like to play with their song titles. So that's it was more of, I got the punk vibe from that, but albeit a more modern punk sound. And actually, I thought that this album overall sounded fairly modern. This is not, I didn't get a big 70s feel from this record. So I always like that. I always like when you hear a record and it doesn't necessarily sound of its time. That can stand out. So I thought that this album, and then the Frozen ones, the second song, it has a little bit of a slower beginning, but then it starts to get fast and energetic, and kind of gets through the kind of that punk sound again. It was a little bit different because they threw a little bit of a keyboard sound that I was hearing there that wasn't really. It was a little different. At least I think there were some more synths, I would say, in the first track, and then there were more of a keyboard. So there's some different things that were in there. So I'm like, okay, this is going to be just a take on punk rock, and then it just kind of started. The more it went on, the more varied it got, and it just kept it interesting. I do like the punk albums, the stuff that we've done, the more straight up punk, like the Clash or the Sex Pistols, or the Ramones. I like that stuff, but I like something like this better because this keeps me more interested because of the variety, and that the variety is good, right? And yes, new wave was definitely the other word that came up to my to my mind as the album went on. The shoegaze, not as much, but I totally see that. The noise rock, it's definitely there. But this to me was the split between a punk album and a new wave album, and I just really liked it. I really appreciated how it just switched styles and switch sounds from song to song, yet it all kind of still was hovered in the same kind of area. But yes, lots of melodic stuff, catchy stuff. There is some discordant stuff going on, like the Talking Heads, like you guys were saying, and I like that. There's more of an ambient thing, like Distant Smile. I like that song too, John. That's got like this 2.5 minute like ambient beginning. It's just like I'm like, okay, is this going to be a 5-minute instrumental? That's okay,
piano. It's ambient piano kind of, which was
Yeah, and then it starts to, and all of a sudden it just gets to this driving guitar part that just kind of comes in, and it starts to get a little bit rocks out. You're getting a little bit of free jazz playing, and kind of a little bit more chaotic soloing or playing that they're doing, which is kind of cool. But again, it doesn't get too arty or too avant-garde. It stays in the lane of being accessible, and I like that very much too. So really interesting album, and there's a lot of substance here, and this is an album that I think would benefit from multiple listens, but I also don't think I needed multiple listens because I could tell right away that I did like it. And I did like the last couple of songs. They definitely went into a different direction, definitely going away from the punk and more into like the, more of the synth type stuff, experimental stuff. And this is another album that I thought, is Brian Eno on this? And I guess Josh, you said he's not. He was on the first one, but I was like, I wouldn't be surprised. Now that I'm more familiar with Eno, this stuff definitely sounds like a band that he would have been into, or they would have been into him, and it sounds like there is a tie in there as well. Mm-hmm. So this is a cool record. This is a good call, Jeff. And I was wondering where this came from because it's only their third highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, which
in fairness, I plucked it from name. Jeff just so he didn't tell me cover this album. It was
got it.
I said let's cover ULTRAVOX because Jeff likes them. So yeah.
It's also for me, it's rare that at this point to not know that at least the name, or have heard the name of an artist before, and I didn't know them at all. So
I didn't either.
Even I know Television in the album, but I didn't know this band at all. So
and they've got a bunch of records. It looks like they had one that came out in 2012.
Oh wow.
Which was the first, but they had the one before that came out before that was 94. So it's not like they're prolific, but they've been around for a while and they have a number of records. But yeah, this is just a cool, interesting listen that really delves into a couple different genres that are all, it's really scratching a bunch of itches here, and big fan. Thumbs up from me.
Yeah, the lyrics are really interesting too. It's hard to understand them initially because he's got a little bit of that like Johnny Lydon thing where he's singing sort of muffled and you can't totally get it. But I luckily had the lyrics up while I was doing it so I could see, and there's some interesting stuff. on this album. I enjoyed the lyrical content too. The first song's very explicit, but then it goes into suburbia type stuff, and Hiroshima Mon Amour. I couldn't quite get what that was lyrically, thematically, kind
It's
of.
French, John, and it's Mon Amour. Mon Amour.
Mon Amour. Gotcha.
Well, it's the name of a
Mon Amour.
movie also, but I don't know if that's intentional. I'm sure it is.
Yeah, I'm just saying lyrically, I wasn't 100% clear of what was going on there, but I did enjoy the lyrics, and it had a little bit of that late 70s angst, mixed with the sort of the krautrock focus on the artificial a little bit that was in there as well. So yes, I just thought I'd throw that out since I've been called the lyrics guy here.
I found the lyrics kind of repetitive. I don't think they were kind of the main interest of the band, to be frank. I think they're more interested in the music side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say for sure because I've done enough homework on that, but yeah, I mean, definitely the music was what stood out to me over the lyrics for sure.
Wait, there were lyrics?
Yeah, well, and there's a sliding scale there in terms of interest.
Also, I'm seeing here, to tie things more, Connie Plank from Noi produced 3 of their albums.
and like every other krautrock band.
Yeah.
So, well, that makes sense because they absolutely are. It's cousins with that sound, for sure. So,
but more like, when we went through the krautrock stuff, some of it was more accessible than others. I would say this is more
this is tied,
modern, mainstream.
Well, it's tied more to Western sounds too, because it could
Yeah.
just as easily be a punk album, and punk is a very Western sound. So yeah, I think that's what the difference is. That it's not like trying to deconstruct the Western sound. It's still very much moored to it. Yeah.
It's interesting. A couple of interesting things here I'm seeing on Wikipedia. First of all, the genre, they say it's post-punk, which it's interesting.
I don't see
it's
how
interesting
it could be
to be
post-punk already.
In 1977. Yeah, exactly.
Timing-wise, that's why I said these like labels sometimes get thrown around. It's like, how could something be post-punk when the Sex Pistols are the same year? So.
Right.
Do you know who did produce this? Steve Lillywhite. From the Dave Matthews. I always think of him from the Lillywhite sessions. He did that Dave Matthews Band album that was never really released. Okay. I didn't know he was around in the 70s. He's been doing this for a while.
He's been doing it for a while.